Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book, this being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, in more ways than one, this episode is kind of about Central City, kind of as a whole, and its people, recovering. Obviously, Barry being there, obviously during some restructuring efforts, volunteers and everything, which includes Star Labs and everything. Joe and Cecile show up as well, of helping rebuild all the destruction from Ava's attack. And Barry being there, it's a Flash saying, hey, I'm sorry I let this city down, but the fact is, no matter what happens, we always come back because we are Central City strong. He's like, because I believe in in the city, I believe in its people, so trying to give them hope again. And obviously, it's not just about that. We see Barry trying to be like super extra romantic with Iris, like all these vacations, dinner, all this stuff. But all of a sudden, the main thread of this episode involving Abracadabra, who's returned. And obviously, I think they said like 4 years ago. So I was like, I'm assuming, and I'm thinking the last time he popped up was when he popped up saying like, hey, I know who Savitar is. I can tell you his identity. I think if I remember correctly, that was around the same circumstances. It was somewhat, I'm assuming it's Savitar because he's like, oh, I know Savitar's identity because I'm from the future and stuff like that. But obviously, they end up luckily working together. Cisco and Frost kind of. Well, it's also interesting. He referred to him as like, oh, mecha vibe. And Cisco's like, whoa, he did not just name me. Which is like also interesting that obviously that's your name now. I think that's kind of cool. But I mean, I guess at some point in time, Cisco named himself, but it's like, because I'm from the future. But it's like, it's that, chicken or the egg type of thing. Do you only know the name mecha vibe? And you gave yourself that name because he suggested it because you already had the name for in the future where he's from. It's a whole thing, like I said, chicken or the egg type of thing. But luckily they were able to take him down. And I love that Cisco's like, why does Argus get to swoop in after these handsome devils, that being us, took down this guy? It's like, does it really matter who gets the credit? Do you really want to fight on who gets the credit? And Cisco's like, yes! He's like, no, it doesn't really matter who gets the credit in the end. But then he was interacting with that dude who was like, he's like, are you for real? He's like, if you're suggesting that I'm a hologram, I can neither confirm nor deny that Argus has ever done. It's like, wait. You're not human. You got to be like a robot or something. Once again, we've seen Argus's ugly future in many different regards. Like everything with Zari. That's why I'm like, I don't know what's going to become of that. Like whether that's still the route Argus is destined to go down or what. I mean, because we don't know how much Argus changed because that's like, 2043-ish when that happened. So it's like, obviously sometime before then. But it's like, we have no idea what changes in Argus. But I'm wondering, I was like, are you supposed to be like an AI or something? Like the way he's talking very robotic. I'm like, that's supposed to be an introduction to that. That's got to be an open line plot point. Like, what is that? You've got to be some like AI or something. Because even it's like, oh, Captain Literal over here, so it's like, yeah, there's definitely something up with that. I'm curious to find out what that is. And if that has, I mean, once again, the timeline's changed so much, so because of Crisis and everything, so we don't know what Argus in this particular timeline is going to look like. I mean, I think things had already changed anyway. Pre-Crisis, in many different regards, they changed the timeline. So post-Crisis is another thing too. So, I mean, who knows? Like maybe the timeline still stay the same pre-Crisis because the timeline changed it for Legends. So maybe all the stuff with Argus changed as well. You don't know. The timeline's constantly in flux between this and Legends. So you never know. So that's just something to kind of, Argus might be going down a completely different route or whatever the case may be. But sadly, it turns out getting captured was exactly what Abracadabra wanted. And in that moment, all these obelisks he make which are basically condensed matter, he ends up making them all into an antimatter bomb. And he was blaming the Flash. He was like, this is because of you that you told me to find that little light of hope, and I did, and because of you it's gone. I'm like, what did Barry do? I was like, wait, is this something future Barry did? I was thinking, like, are we on some Eobard level stuff of like you does something in the future? Well, Eobard, once again, the show's never really gotten into it, but obviously Eobard has his own particular reasons for hating Barry, just because it's like, oh, my destiny was to be a villain, blah blah blah, just because I found out like, oh, I actually admired you and looked up to you. Oh, I was destined to be your greatest villain, blah, 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 blah. I couldn't be you, so I wanted to be your ultimate enemy. Something like that. I mean, I might be, like I said, that's something from the comics I think people have said, so I don't really know what Eobard in the shows thing. Regardless, I was wondering if it was something along those veins. And obviously for Barry, it's like this antimatter bomb is going to wipe out the entire city, and he can't do anything to stop it. Because for him, he's saying, because I got tricked again. Because being let into Argus was exactly what Abracadabra wanted, because he wanted access to the 3 obelisks so he could make his antimatter bomb. And for Barry, it's like, I played right into his hands. I got tricked again. And I think that's a beautiful, not beautiful, but I think it's a really interesting element that they brought up, that, like, obviously there are going to be ramifications. There's going to be fallout from what happened with the whole Mirror Iris, just either in general, because in this episode, there's actually a support group for people who were taken and replaced by Ava. Like, we saw it last episode. There was a long, like, it's like they kept getting calls about, oh yeah, this person isn't who you thought they were, personality changes and stuff like that. So, hell, even Allegra calling Iris out by being like, yeah, your article, you're going over information that was already kind of like talked to death about. Plus, nothing in this article is talking about you. But she's like, no, like, I'm the reporter, not the subject. But it's like, maybe in this particular case, you're both. Because Iris not wanting to deal with it, because it would mean, and because no one wants to feel like a victim, and sadly she was one. And I think, you know, she was hoping, and she talks about it later, just kind of avoiding all of it, not dealing with it. And Barry's kind of been doing the exact same thing, because he's like, you know, it's like, he was even saying it to her earlier. I figured it's like he's doing all this stuff, and he's like, please let me make this up to you. And I'm like, what do you? Oh, like, I figured, like, it's at that moment I was like, Mirror Iris. So, like, both of them are dealing with it, not talking to the other one about what they're going through. And, you know, Barry, you know, finally sits down and talks to Iris. She's just like, talk to me. Like, what did you mean by being tricked again? It's like, he didn't see Mirror Iris for who she was. And she's like, that's not your fault. He's like, whose fault is it? He's like, if I should have known, I promised to be by your side forever. And I didn't see through this stranger that obviously wasn't you. And if I hadn't been used like that, then maybe I could have stopped Ava before any of this happened. So for him, it's like, everything that happened to the city, Ava's attack on this city is on me, because I think that's why he tried to inspire the city even more, because he's like, that's what he means by just like, I didn't stop Ava's attack in more ways than one. He blames himself for like, it's because of me that everything went sideways. And obviously, I like what Iris had said, like, you know, no one can blame you for that. None of this is your fault. Like, you can't blame yourself that, you know, because it's easy to kind of want to blame yourself because you blame that heart of yours, because, you know, being betrayed by someone that you have every instinct in your body is telling you to give them your full trust, everything that, you know, because that's also what spiraled and led him down that path of, my heart is my weakness. Like, Ava used it against me. She used it with Mirror Iris, but also him being who he is, also it made Mirror Iris want to just be her own person and not just be Ava's to control, and just want to be, it's like, I want to be my own person, like, because of how big Barry's heart is. Like, he was able to kind of reach her before the end, you know? And I think, you know, once again, he's kind of seen his heart as a weakness recently because of that, but obviously it ends up being his greatest strength. And in that moment, thinking about what Abracadabra said, he figured it out. And he was like, wait. And obviously we end up finding out the thing he's been carrying around, that box or whatever, had like a particular ring. It's the thing that Cisco had made. And I love they're like, oh, basically it's a more compact version of John's ability, his Martian Manhunter powers, to make people remember their original, the everything pre-crisis. And it's like, wait, what? Everyone's like, why did you make that? He was like, well, there was Laurel Lane and Mia Queen. Never mind. It's like, right. So I guess I guess he never publicly made that for other people. I guess that was mainly just for them. I was like, that's so interesting bringing that back full circle like that. But also it turns out that's what happened to Abracadabra. He had a different he had a family. He had a wife, he had a son, but they disappeared because of crisis. And he's blaming Barry because he's like, I was dreaming for like 13 months, and then it was like, he's like, I need to get out. Like, he tried to run tests on himself, but they figured out, like, obviously there were memories in there of a life he never lived. So he ends up finding Cisco technology, and I love him being like, oh, it's so antiquated and whatever, and I fixed it, and it's Cisco being like, oh, this guy sucks. But then he like used it and ended up restoring his memories and found out about what Barry did. It's like, if you had disappeared during Crisis, none of the people I care about would have disappeared. This is kind of on you and everything. So, but I mean, that's sad thing just to kind of put on Barry, because it's not just the entire multiverse disappeared. He was one of 7 people in existence left, to fight the Anti-Monitor. The Anti-Monitor. So it is a sad situation that, and I think that's so interesting, making it so that, like there will be ramifications built upon ramifications upon ramifications, because what I'm looking at is fallout. There's more and more fallout because of Crisis to come, both in good ways and bad ways. More often than not, when you think fallout, you think bad stuff, but just there's going to be positive stuff that comes about it. There's going to be terrible stuff becoming. Obviously, this being an example of it, which obviously Crisis wasn't Barry's fault, but it is a thing of, which I even love that being a thing of like, wait, the antimatter bomb is like, wait, are we dealing with Crisis Part 2? Luckily, the antimatter is not enough to go on a universal level, but it is enough to destroy a city, which is still millions of lives. So, but Barry talking to Abracadabra like that, I thought was so interesting, and I thought, once again, tying back to Crisis, you are in fact the paragon of love, I mean, once again, I think that's so interesting, because obviously we're able to use your heart you and Iris together, we're able to reach, Ava, but also them working together actually led to them being able to reach Abracadabra as well, because it made Barry understand what was kind of going on with Abracadabra. It made his words make more sense to him and everything. I was like, that's so fascinating, but Barry talks about, like, he's like, it's not fair that we are here and so many aren't. I mean, like, Barry's lost a lot of people. Like, obviously, he brings up the example of, like, I lost someone that was like a brother to me, and it's like, for him, it's like, I live every day to honor his sacrifice. But it's not just him, like, so many worlds were lost. Yeah, there were quite a few worlds that came together because of Crisis, but there were so many that were lost in the process, so many lives that we don't, when the multiverse does start back up again, I mean, to us, in a sense, those lives are going forever and never coming back, because that's what Barry was saying, that old multiverse, it's like, better than anyone, killing me, destroy the city. You just want people to suffer, to feel the pain that you've lost, like the entire life that you lost, what was taken from you. You just want everyone else to feel that. But obviously, Barry's felt that on multiple occasions. I mean, he was there when the multiverse disappeared, which included his wife, his friends. He had to know that they were going nuts, but, at least they were able to be brought back, but not everyone was. He had to watch so many people go. Some people he never got back, So, I mean, that's very, it's a very sad thing to think about. But the point I was also making is, like, even if the multiverse restarts, none of those people will ever be who they were before. Like, say, like, we get an Earth 2. There might be a Harry on that Earth 2, but even if he is, he won't be the same Harry that they've come to know when the multiverse builds back out, because even if it's like those people that disappear when the multiverse disappeared come back in this new multiverse, they won't be the same people. So those lives will forever be lost, forever changed, So who they, it's kind of almost an existential thing of, they're not the same people that they were before. So who they were kind of died to a certain extent. Like I said, that's me getting very deep into it. Like I said, it's very existential to think about, but I just thought that was kind of fascinating, me overthinking it. But Barry was able to reach Abracadabra, and it's like, what do I do? It's like, even with those people gone, they never leave us. You kind of keep living to find a way forward, carrying them with you. And it's like, he, tells them the name of his son, his wife, even his own name. And it's like, what's the name of the person you lost? And Barry is like, Oliver. And it's like, my name's Felipe. And it's like, he's like, in my time, we're mortal enemies, so why are you helping me? He's like, because maybe so that the next time we meet, we aren't. And in that, moment, some other being shows up and, like, wrecks shop. It's like some hulking monster. You're like, what the hell is that? And apparently it's able to absorb an antimatter bomb, and you're like, wait, what? Barry threw lightning at it, did nothing. It was crushing Barry, but then all of a sudden it stopped. I guess someone ordered it to back down. So I'm assuming this has something to do with like the earthquakes, because at first they were thinking like maybe, well, because they were saying those were time quakes earlier in the season. I mean, not season, but episode. So obviously we're familiar with time quakes because of Legends, but other than that, I'm so curious to find it. Because obviously, this in some shape or form connects to Godspeed. Because Godspeed was like initially a future villain. Because obviously he existed in the time that Nora was from and everything. Like he was obviously out and about doing his thing back then. So, and obviously those storms, I'm assuming like when Barry, once again, we saw it like when him and Iris are kissing. Like we see like the multicolor lightning. So it might be, you know, a time storm coming back full force. Like, whereas before, they were able to stop it because Barry went inside of the Speed Force icon. But now, like, Barry doesn't have the Speed Force, at least the Speed Force in the same vein of being this conscious being that can talk to him and let him know what's what. They will probably not know for a while the after effects of this probably set a lot of stuff in motion. Because even Abracadabra said this line of, oh, you better hope I kill you first because it's better than what's waiting for you in the future, Chronarch. And it's like, what is that? Whatever it is, it's definitely not what he just fought, because that shocked even Abracadabra, because even he was like, wait, what? That's impossible. You just absorbed an antimatter bomb that's strong enough to wipe out the strongest thing in the universe that literally wiped out an entire universe. An entire multiverse. This would have been enough to wipe out an entire city, and it absorbed it like it was nothing. And it's like, what is that thing? Who is that thing? Is this thing, I would assume it's related to Godspeed, not unless Godspeed is pulling up all these other villains from, I don't know. Not unless it's a byproduct of, like they said, the Speed Force thing of like, my thought was last episode that was going to create other speedsters out there in the world. Maybe it had other adverse effects, kind of very much similar to when the Thinker manipulated the whole situation to get Barry out of the Speed Force, and that antimatter created multiple metahumans. So maybe it's kind of something in a similar vein where like that Speed Force storm of sorts created many other metahumans. We'll ultimately have to wait and see on that front. But obviously Abracadabra sacrificed himself. It's sad, like, you know, in that moment he shifted over to become a hero. I'd forgotten that the same thing happened to Hartley. He was another, like, because like him and Barry were good at one point in time because Barry had changed the timeline, but then it turns out, things work differently in this timeline because of Crisis, so they were kind of mortal enemies again, you know. So once again, Crisis, the gift that just keeps on giving in more ways than one. So now is a situation they're trying to figure out how they fight this thing that seems unstoppable, that even the material that can wipe out and stop everything, the antimatter, that something like that couldn't stop this thing. You know, what hope does Team Flash have? But, you know, they'll have to find a way. Joe did bring up something interesting where he said, like, basically there was a liaison kind of like checking in. Like, I'm assuming that's they made a point of that, so it's like, okay, that's going to turn into a plot point. Now, that's going to be interesting and what that necessarily means. I guess it's someone just going to keep an eye on things to see, like, you know, why things kind of went so wrong. I guess with the whole Ava thing, like, things got very cataclysmic in that moment. So I guess, like, we're going to figure out, like, what happened there, what went wrong, probably try to make some changes to that. I'm curious. I wonder, will that have any effect on Team Flash going forward in the sense of, like, CCPD's relationship with Team Flash? We'll see what kind of happens on that front. Like I said, that Argus stuff makes me go, like, we must be kicking that off in some shape or form. I'm curious to see where that goes. But what I thought was also pretty neat, too, is that obviously Iris is like, yeah, you told me what I needed to hear. Yes, it was a little hard hearing it from an intern. So, Allegra, you're coming on as a full staff writer. So it's like, awesome. You know, but Iris actually shows up at that meeting because she'd actually gone earlier in the episode and she was trying to write an article, but she couldn't bring herself to do it because it's just like, she didn't want to talk about it because they're like, wait, are you okay? And they were like, were you taken? And she opens up at the end, opens up to her pain of like, I was gone for 3 months. And for her, it's like, I'm angry and I'm like feeling sorry for myself, and all, like, feeling all of that makes her, you know, she doesn't like feeling that way. So she wants it just to be yesterday's pain so she can move on. But she's like, I cannot move on until I give myself permission to feel the way I feel. It's okay that I feel the way I do. And wants to let everyone know, like, obviously, none of us are in this alone. We've all felt that pain, being in that world, that loneliness. Because Iris is in there longer than anybody. So I was wondering what the after effects of potentially what the Mirrorverse did to her mind would be. But it seems like that's recovered. But it's still the thing of, you were in there 3 months, alone for a majority of that time. Even when Camilla and Singh were there, you were still kind of alone. Plus what the Mirrorverse was doing to your mind. What evil was doing to your mind by messing with you. There's a lot of layers to that. And that's, both her and Barry kind of have to find a way to kind of, work on that trauma. It's not just going to be something that disappears in a day, but it is something like we got to allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling and kind of, take those steps forward, And Iris had said, like, obviously writing an article isn't enough because she's like, I need to do something bigger. I owe it to all of them. So what that necessarily looks like is going to be interesting to see where Iris kind of takes that going forward. But another interesting thing, as we got as the stinger of this episode, has been the whole Caitlin and Frost thing. Like, they've been complaining about headaches earlier, and obviously everything's reading normal. So it's like, what's that all about? Which I even love, which obviously Cisco and Chester have been obviously hitting it off more and more, and I just love the whole thing. Like, if you want to be part of Team Flash, you can't keep beating me at Fortnite. And it's like, oh, also Cisco, look at this. It's like, hey, Killer Frost has her own body, which I also love that it's like, yeah, it's like, because Allegra was like, why don't you switch over to Frost? It's like, well, I mean, yeah, we know she's rehabilitated, but she's still kind of got warrants out there. It's like, oh, interesting. I love that little detail of like, right, she can't just be out and about doing her thing. She can low key, but not like out and about. But it's like, hey, we're separate people now. It's like, cool. That's awesome. Is there going to be any drawback to this? Like, is this going to be like, what happened? Like, I guess it's just like something in their DNA finally. Maybe it's something that Caitlin's mom was helping with that it had, like, maybe whatever they were working on and what happened kind of had this adverse reaction, and now they're split. Once again, will there be ramifications for that? Hopefully they could just be like, hey, we're separated. Maybe that'll last forever. I was thinking that that'd eventually be where they would take that, where it's just like they're able to be just two separate people. Like I said, hopefully, because you never know, like, not being, like, having two separate bodies might have an issue, like, where they might need to become one again so they don't die. Almost like a Firestorm type of situation. It might be kind of similar in that vein. Granted, Firestorm situation was very different, but still, like, it might be something in that vein where it's like they need to be connected in order to survive, because being separated, I mean, who knows? It'd be interesting if it's like this could actually become their power from now on. Like, yeah, they need to fuse back together, but maybe every once in a while, hey, we can still split anytime. We just can't stay separate for too long. Or, like I said, could be a permanent thing. Either way, I'm interested to see where all of this in general is going to take us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.